I've kept my mother's old phone charged in a drawer since she died 2 years ago. Last month at 11:04 on a Thursday night, it rang. And I knew it was that phone before I was fully awake, because it still has the marimba ringtone that nobody has used since about 2016. I want to explain the phone before I explain the call, because otherwise you'll think I'm unwell, and by the end of this you may think that anyway. It's an iPhone 8 in a case with a cracked corner. It lives in the top drawer of the sideboard in my dining room with the charging cable already plugged in. Every few weeks I plug it back in. I keep it charged because I call her voicemail. That's it. That's the whole reason. If you call her number, it still goes to the greeting she recorded in about 2014. Hi, you've reached Margie. Leave it after the beep. I probably won't check it. And she laughs at the end of it. One syllable, because she thought recording a voicemail greeting was embarrassing. I have called that number more times than I would like to write down. I have never told my husband. I have never told my sister. That's the sort of thing I did with grief. And if you've done it too, then you already understand. And if you haven't, then I'm not going to be able to explain it to you. Anyway, I kept the line active, $11 a month on a prepaid plan, which is a thing you can do, and which I have been paying for 2 years so that a recording of my mother laughing does not stop existing. And that is the only reason, the entire reason, the whole chain of causation, that a woman from a billing office in another county was able to reach anybody at all on that Thursday night. She said, "Hi, I'm so sorry to call this late. I'm trying to reach the responsible party for Wendell Marsh." And I sat up in the dark in my own dining room with my mother's phone in my hand. And I said, "Who? I need to give you the shape of my family before this goes any further, because it's a very particular shape, and it explains why nobody caught it. My father was Aldous Bramhall. He died on Route 9 outside Milford Junction in September of 2005 in a head-on collision at 4:20 in the afternoon on a clear, dry Tuesday. I was 15. My sister Perpetua was 11. The other driver was a man named Wendell Marsh. Everybody in my town knows that name. Everybody. There is a bench with my father's name on it at the entrance to the sports complex. There is a scholarship. For 19 years, the Bramhall crash has been a thing people say, and Wendell Marsh has been the man who did it. I built a whole self out of that. I want to be honest about it. I did the victim impact panel thing for years, the ones where they bring you into a room with people who've been convicted of something on a road, and you sit on a folding chair at the front and tell them what it did to your family. I did it 11 times between the ages of 22 and 31. I have a laminated certificate in a drawer. I had a routine. That's the word for it, and I'm going to use it. I had an opener, which was to hold up my father's whistle. He coached JV softball. And I had a middle, where I talked about my sister at the funeral. And I had a close. And the close was a sentence I had said out loud to strangers 11 times. The close was, somebody made a decision that afternoon, and my father is not here, and the person who made the decision got to go home. I said that 11 times, in a room, to 30 people at a time. I was good at it, which is a disgusting thing to be good at. There is a version of me that gets to be angry at other people for the last 19 years, and it is a smaller version than I'd like. And here is the thing I believed absolutely for 19 years and never once checked, that Wendell Marsh died at the scene too. I don't know who told me. That's the thing that has bothered me most since. I've asked my sister and she doesn't know either. It was simply the water we swam in. Both drivers died. It was that kind of crash. Nobody in my family ever said the sentence "he survived," and nobody ever said the sentence "he didn't." And when you are 15, you do not go to the library and pull the microfilm on the accident that killed your father. My mother was Marguerite. Everybody called her Margie. She was a school secretary for 31 years, and she was the most organized human being I have ever met. She died with a labeled box for everything, a folder for the funeral home, a folder for the insurance, a folder that said taxes 2019-2022, and one that said girls, baby. She had ovarian cancer for 14 months, and she died at home in my sister's arms with me holding her feet, and she did not leave one single thing unfinished, or so I thought, up until 11:04 p.m. on a Thursday. I should say what she was like, because organized school secretary makes her sound like a filing cabinet with legs, and she wasn't. She was funny in a dry way that people missed on the first pass. She swore, but only in the car. She kept a plastic tub of cheap sunglasses by the door because she lost them constantly and had decided at some point that the correct solution was volume. She could not be in a room where somebody was being humiliated, a game show, a movie, anything, and would get up and leave. She had a thing about it. She also had a rule, which she said to me and my sister our entire childhood, usually about somebody at church or somebody's ex-husband, and I have thought about it approximately 400 times in the last year. The rule was, you don't get to know what a thing cost somebody. She said it as an instruction about judging people. I understood it as an instruction about judging people. I have had to sit with the possibility that she was also, the entire time, saying it about herself out loud at the kitchen table to 2 children who were not listening. And one more thing, which I only put together afterward. After Dad died, she got very strict about money in a specific way. Not poor strict, tight strict. We had what we needed, but she did not take vacations. In 19 years, my mother went on 2 trips, both of them to my aunt's, both of them by car. She drove a 2004 Camry until 2019. When I got married, she gave me $2,000 and cried about it not being more. And I told her it was fine, and I remember being faintly, privately annoyed because I knew she had a school pension and a paid-off house, and I did not understand where the money went. She was paying $1,840 a month. The woman on the phone was named Charisse, and she was, in the end, extremely extremely kind about it. She said the account had gone unpaid for 26 months. She said the facility had sent letters to an address, which she read out, and which was my mother's house sold 19 months ago. She said they had gone through every phone number in the file. She said this was the last one. I said, "Who is Wendell Marsh?" And Charisse paused and then said carefully, "Ma'am, are you not a family member?" I said, "I'm Margie Bramhall's daughter. Margie died 2 years ago." Longer pause. She said, "Oh." Then she said, "I'm not supposed to discuss the patient with you." And I said, "Just tell me what kind of place you are." And Charisse said, "We're a long-term neurological care facility." I got out of bed and went and stood in my kitchen with all the lights off. I said, "How long has he been there?" She said she really couldn't. And then, after about 4 seconds, in a completely different voice, a person voice, not a billing voice, she said, "Honey, a long time." The ledger came in the mail 9 days later, after I sent the death certificate and the estate letters and about 11 emails. 1 page. I have it in a plastic sleeve now, which tells you something about where I'm at. Cardinal Ridge, neurological care patient. Marsh, Wendell A. responsible party. M. Bramhall, née Ventrias. 228 consecutive monthly payments. First posted 09/2005. Last posted 11/2023, 1,240, 228 months. 19 years. First posted September 2005, the month after my father's funeral. Last posted November 2023, the month before she got too sick to sit up at the desk in the back bedroom where she did the bills. I did the multiplication because of course I did. $419,520. My mother made $41,000 a year as a school secretary. I drove 3 hours to Cardinal Ridge on a Saturday without telling my husband where I was going, which is not something I do, and they would not let me pass the lobby, which is correct, and which I understood, and which made me want to put my hands through the glass. I was nobody. I had no standing. Wendell Marsh's medical information is his, and the fact that my dead mother had been paying for it did not make me anything. So I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours and did the thing I should have done 19 years earlier and had never once done, which is that I looked it up. The newspaper archive is free with a library card. It took me 11 minutes. There were 2 articles about the crash. My family kept one of them. It's in the box, in a sleeve, the one with my father's yearbook photo and the words, "Beloved Coach." The second one ran 4 days later. The headline was, "Survivor of RT9 Crash in Critical Condition." I read it in a parking lot in my car, and I had to put the phone face down on the passenger seat and get out and walk around for a while. In a windbreaker, in a parking lot, in November. He hadn't died. He had never died. He had been 3 hours from my house for 19 years, while I stood in rooms with a laminated certificate telling people what his carelessness had done to my family. I called my sister from that parking lot. Perpetua is 4 years younger and much steadier than me, and she listened to the entire thing without saying one word, which took about 6 minutes. Then she said, "Say the amount again." I said it again. She said, "Every month?" I said, "Every month for 19 years, first payment the month after Dad's funeral." And there was a silence on that phone call that I want to try to describe, because both of us got there at the same time and neither of us wanted to say it first. Then Perpetua said, in a very small voice, "Mom went to book club on the 3rd Saturday. Every month. My whole childhood and all of my adulthood. The 3rd Saturday, out the door at 9, back after dinner. Book club." I said, "Which book club?" And my sister said, "Tilly, I don't know. 19 years. Neither of us had ever once asked which book club. Not one time. Not what are you reading, not whose house, not who's in it. It was just a thing our mother did, the way she did the crossword. And it was so completely established as furniture that in 19 years, 2 reasonably intelligent daughters had never asked a single follow-up question about a full day of their mother's life 12 times a year." Perpetua went quiet on the line for a while. Then she said, "I asked her once." I said, "What?" She said, "Not really asked. I was like 14 and I wanted her to drive me somewhere on a Saturday, and she said she had book club. And I said something snotty like, 'You're always at book club,' and my sister stopped. She got upset, like actually upset, way out of proportion. And then she apologized for like a week. We sat on that phone call with our whole childhood turning over. Then Perpetua said the thing that has stuck to me worse than almost anything else in this, which was, Tilly, she never missed one. She had chemo on a Thursday and went on the Saturday. I remember, because I was mad at her about it. I want to put something here about the 2 weeks after that phone call, because if I skip straight to the ledger, it sounds like I was investigating and I wasn't. I was not functioning. I did not tell my husband for 9 days. He knew something was happening. I was up at 2 in the morning, 3 nights running, and I made him check the doors twice, which is not a thing I do. And he did the right thing and waited. And on the 9th night, I told him in the kitchen, and it took 40 minutes, and he did not say one word until the end. Then he said, "So what do you actually think it is?" And I said the thing I had been refusing to say for 9 days. I said, "I think my father caused it." Saying it out loud in my own kitchen made my ears ring. I sat down on the floor. He got down on the floor with me, which is a good thing about him, because there is no other arrangement of those facts. There isn't. You do not send $1,840 a month for 19 years to the man who killed your husband. That is not grief, and it is not forgiveness, and it is not some kind of saintliness. That's restitution. Somebody in my family owed that man something, and my mother had been quietly paying it alone since the month after the funeral. It took 6 weeks to get standing. I am the successor to the responsible party on the account, and it turns out that means something. something, and there is a form. They let me in on a Tuesday in January. Wendell Marsh is 61. He's in a wheelchair with a molded support on the left side. The whole left side of his face sits differently than the right. He can speak. Not sentences exactly. Words. Maybe 40 of them is what the charge nurse told me, and she said it fondly, the way you'd say somebody has 40 birds in their yard. He was in a green cardigan. Somebody had shaved him that morning. I had spent 6 weeks preparing for that room, and none of the preparation was any use because every version I'd rehearsed had me walking in as somebody. The daughter. The one who found out. A person with a position. What actually happened is that a man in a wheelchair looked up when the door opened and smiled at me because someone had come, and that is apparently what he does when someone comes. The charge nurse, her name is Bettina, and she has been at Cardinal Ridge for 22 years, walked me in and said, "Wendell, you've got a visitor," in the exact tone you'd use for anybody, and then left us, which I had not expected and was not ready for. I sat in the chair by the window. He watched me do it with mild interest. I said, "Hi," and then I could not think of one single thing to say to him, so I said, "It's cold out," and he said, "Cold," and nodded and looked pleased, and I nearly came apart right there in the first 90 seconds. And on the wall behind his bed there was a corkboard, about 3 feet by 2, absolutely covered. Birthday cards, 19 of them, plus Christmas cards, plus a few that were nothing in particular, layered over each other, thumbtacked. Some of them faded down to almost nothing on the parts that had been in the sun. Every single one of them in my mother's handwriting. I stood in that room and did not do anything for probably a full minute. Bettina had come back in behind me at some point. She said, "Are you the daughter?" I said, "Whose?" She said, "Margie's." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh, that's lovely. She talked about you two all the time. You're the one at the school and your sister's the one with the twins." I went out and stood in the hallway. When I came back, Bettina was straightening the bed and she said, not unkindly, she stopped coming and nobody could get hold of her. We wrote twice. We thought and she stopped, and then she said, "Well, people do." I said, "She died 2 years ago." Bettina put the pillow down. She said, "Oh no." And then after a second, "Does he know?" And that is the question I had driven 3 hours toward and had not once considered. I said, "I don't know. Should he?" And Bettina said, "I've been doing this a long time and I've never had a good answer to that one." The crash file cost $34 and took 6 weeks, and it is 140 pages long. Here is what is in it. The reconstruction, the actual engineering reconstruction, with the scaling diagrams and the gouge marks and the crush measurements, concluded that the eastbound vehicle crossed the center line. The eastbound vehicle was a 1999 Buick LeSabre, my father's car. Wendell Marsh's toxicology was clean. Nothing. He was a 42-year-old HVAC technician driving home from a service call with a clipboard on the passenger seat. My family sued him. I knew that part. It's the only part of the aftermath I remember clearly. My uncle Hollis at the kitchen table with folders. What I did not know, because nobody ever said, is how it ended. His insurance carrier settled at policy limits, $300,000, without ever putting the reconstruction in front of a jury. I called an attorney about that specific thing because I could not understand it. She read the file and explained it to me in about 4 minutes. She said carriers do that. She said with a dead coach, 2 young daughters, a sympathetic widow, and a defendant who couldn't testify because he couldn't speak. No carrier in the world takes that to a jury on a centerline dispute. She said they paid to make it go away. It happens constantly. And then she said the part I wasn't ready for. She said policy limits wouldn't have covered his own care. He'd have been left with the judgment and no coverage for himself. Wendell Marsh lost his house in 2006. There was one more box. My mother kept everything, and the box in her closet marked Aldos. Medical had my father's records in it going back to 1997 because she was the kind of person who requested her family's records and filed them. 2 visits, April and June of 2005. The first one says the patient reports a brief episode of loss of awareness while at work. Duration unclear, no injury. The second one, 10 weeks later, says a second similar episode and includes a referral to neurology. He never went. There's no neurology record. There's nothing after June. And clipped to the June visit summary, there is an appointment card for a neurologist in Hamlin with a date in July, and on the back of it, in my mother's handwriting in pencil, he says he'll tell them at renewal. Renewal, his commercial driver's license renewal, which was in December. I sat on the floor of my own closet with that appointment card, and I understood the entire 19 years in about 4 seconds, which is not enough time for something like that. It's really not. My father had 2 episodes of losing consciousness. He didn't go to the neurologist. He decided he'd disclose it at his CDL renewal in December, which is a decision a certain kind of man makes. A coach, a guy who's fine, a guy who doesn't want to fuss, and which is completely understandable and which killed him in September. And my mother knew, not in a guessing way, in a wrote it on the back of the card way. She was in the passenger seat of that marriage for the whole 6 months. She was the one who filed the visit summaries. She was the one who put the appointment card on the fridge and then, at some point, took it off the fridge and put it in a folder. I read that card probably 50 times over the next week, and the thing that got me in the end was the word he. He says he'll tell them at renewal, not Al, not your dad. She wrote it the way you write something you've already lost an argument about. I drove to my Uncle Hollis's house that weekend with a folder. Hollis is my father's older brother, and he was an insurance adjuster for 31 years, and he is now 79 and sharp as a tack, and he was delighted to see me until he wasn't. I put the appointment card on the table. He looked at it. it. He turned it over. He read the back, and he did not do one single thing that a guilty person does. He put it back down and folded his hands and said, "All right." I said, "You knew." He said, "I knew in about 9 days." He explained it to me the way he must have explained 1,000 settlements. Completely calm, in order, with the reasoning attached to each step, and this is the part I still can't get around. He did not tell me one lie. Not one. Every single thing he said checked out later. He said, the state police pull certain records after a fatal and not others. He said, the medical file only comes in if somebody asks for it, and nobody asks for it if the driver's dead and there's no complaint history. He said, there was a $400,000 life policy 11 months old, and 11 months is inside the contestability window, and a carrier that finds out about 2 undisclosed neurological events denies that claim and does it happily. He said, there was a widow with no income and 2 girls, one of them 15. He said, I did that in 12 days. It was the last useful thing I ever did for my brother. I said, you let a man take the blame. And Hollis said, nobody took blame. There was no charge and no trial and no verdict. There was a civil settlement between 2 insurance companies and I did not have anything to do with it. And I said, you know what I mean? He said, I know what you mean. I sat there in his den with the golf trophies and the good chair, and I tried the only argument I had left, which was the one about Wendell. I said, he lost his house. Hollis said, I know that. You know that. Tilly, I've known everything about that man's finances since 2006. It's what I did for a living. He said it without 1 ounce of shame. I know what he lost. I know what the judgment was. I know his carrier folded, and I know he wasn't going to be able to work again either way, because that crash took his frontal lobe and no amount of paperwork was going to give it back. I said, then how do you sleep? And my uncle said, very well, because there wasn't a version of that week where everybody comes out whole. There was a version where your mother loses the policy and the house and you 2 go into a rental in Hamlin, and there was a version where she doesn't. I picked one. That's the entire job. That was the job for 31 years. Then he sat back in his chair and said the sentence that I think ended something in me permanently. He said, your mother agreed. I said she wouldn't have. And Hollis Bramhall looked at me with total unhurried patience and said, then ask her. I stood up and got my coat, and I was almost at the door when he said one more thing, and he said it gently, which was worse. He said, sweetheart, what did you think all that money was? I stopped in his hallway. He said, I've had her tax returns in front of me. I did them for 6 years after your father died. She had a school salary and a paid-off house, and she never had a dime. He shrugged one shoulder. I never asked. It wasn't mine to ask. He knew. Not the details, maybe. But he had looked at his sister-in-law's finances for 6 years and seen a hole in them the size of a mortgage and had decided, like everybody else in my family, that the correct thing to do about a thing you don't understand is nothing at all. He was telling the truth about that too. That's what I've had to sit with. She did agree, in some sense, at a kitchen table in a bad week, at 38 years old, with no money, holding a folder that a competent man was explaining to her. I don't know what agreeing looked like. I don't know if she said a word or if she just didn't say one. What I know is what she did starting the following month. She started sending $1,840 every month to the man they had let take it. She did it for 19 years. She did it through a mortgage and 2 kids' college and a used Camry and a chemo copay. She never told her daughters. She never told her sister. She never told a priest as far as I know. And she went on the 3rd Saturday of every month and signed herself into that visitor log as Margie Van Trees, her maiden name, so nobody at Cardinal Ridge would ever connect her to a name that was in the newspaper. And in the little box marked relationship, she wrote, every single time for 19 years, friend. I took my phone with me the second time I went. I sat next to his chair and I pulled up a photograph of my mother, one from Perpetua's wedding, in the blue dress, laughing. And I turned it around and held it where he could see it. And I said, do you know who that is? And Wendell Marsh, who has about 40 words, looked at that screen for a long moment. Then he lifted his right hand and put one finger on the glass and said, Margie. I said yes. And then he worked for it. His jaw moved a few times before anything came out, and it took maybe 8 seconds. And I have never in my life watched anybody try that hard at anything. He said, sorry, 19 years, 12 visits a year, and every single time, that is what he had been saying to her. I resumed the payments out of the estate. That part wasn't hard, and I'm not going to pretend it was. 6 months later, I took the medical records to the state police and asked that the crash file be supplemented. It doesn't overturn anything, because there was never anything to overturn. No charge, no verdict, nothing. All it does is put a document in a file where a document should have been in 2005. The trooper who took it was about 26 years old and did not entirely understand why I was crying. The scholarship committee declined to change the language. The bench is still there. I go past it most weeks. Hollis has not spoken to me since and has told the family I've had some kind of breakdown, and about half of them believe him, and I have stopped keeping track of which half. Perpetua didn't speak to me for a year. Then last spring she called on a Tuesday about nothing at all, and now we talk again, and we have never once discussed it directly, which is very much a thing our family does. I found Wendell's sister in Fort Wayne. She hadn't been able to make the drive since 2011 for reasons that are nobody's business, but were mostly about money. She's been 3 times now. I still have my mother's phone in the drawer, and I still keep it charged. I don't call the voicemail anymore. I stopped somewhere in the middle of all this, and I couldn't tell you exactly when. But I'm not going to let the line lapse, because on the 3rd Saturday of every month, I drive 3 hours to Cardinal Ridge, and I sign in at the desk, and where it says relationship, I write the same word she did.